Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next webinar for significant disabilities in our series for this year, 2014 and 15. We want to welcome back Cindy White Botello, and her session title today and content is going to be introducing to us how to create and use challenges for students with significant disabilities. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and I'm going to turn it over to Cindy.
Good afternoon. Hey, Julie, I got some feedback from somebody too. So if you're not, could you everybody make sure you're muted? Sometimes you can hear a little bit too much. And I am
mute mine. Maybe it's even me, so I'll go ahead and take care of that. Sorry.
That's okay. I don't know if it is. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about is calendars for children with visual impairments and additional disabilities, including deafblindness. I would also say, as a former autism consultant and a former special ed teacher who worked with, I guess you'd say a level 3 classroom, these calendars apply to a lot of the students that we work with. These calendar, what I'm going to talk about today in terms of calendar systems. And as Julie said a little earlier, I have a tendency to go long, and I'm really sorry about that. And today is going to be a struggle because that was what my struggle was, trying to shorten this up. This is a very important topic, and I see some real common mistakes. So it's hard to make this short, but I'm going to do my best to get through it today. Why isn't I'm not advancing. Hold on here a second, folks. Okay. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to touch real briefly on connections to the DLM's expanded taxonomy. There are some definite connections here, and I want you guys to know what those are. We're going to talk about why calendar systems are important. I'm going to hover on communication. We're going to take some time there because one of the biggest mistakes that I see made with calendars is people don't use them for communication. They typically use them as a tool to dictate to the kids, this is what you're going to do and this is what you're going to do next. And we need to expand that into communication. We're also going to talk about cognition, motor, and then self-regulation, which some people will call behaviors. And then I'm going to refer to a book by Robbie Bleha and how she defines different levels of calendar systems. We're going to talk about some different levels. I'm going to show you some pictures of different sample calendars, and then we're going to have some closing comments and resources. And what I would really encourage you guys to do after this presentation is go to that resource page, the Word document, and look it over because there's some really good information in there about calendar implementation, what it looks like, what its benefits are, and things like that. And it includes some video footage of different kids using calendars. So in terms of that DLM's expanded taxonomy of cognitive processes, I've been using that pretty consistently throughout this presentation about which population of kids which population of kids is calendars going to be a fit for? And I would say it's for any of those kids at that attend level and below. Now, at that attend level too, they have to be able to recognize a few people, locations, sounds, and act appropriately on a couple of objects. So we're not just, they've got to have some idea about the activities that are occurring within their day. If they don't, then we need to pair some objects with the activity so that they start to build that object-activity association. And that's another reason why we very purposely scheduled this series of workshops so that calendars is the last piece, because you can't have a good calendar if you don't have some good, meaningful activities going for your kids. And we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Again, specifically the population of kids that attending and responding population of kids, those are going to be our kids we're going to have calendars with. The foundational nodes, what I did in that, I went through and starred some of those nodes that these kids would be on that calendar's level. So not all kids are going to be on that calendar's level. Those kids at that pre-intentional level, those kids that are really still inside their bodies and aren't understanding that there's this world potentially that exists beyond their bodies, they might not quite be ready for calendars yet. So, you know, in the broad scope of things, the one point that I really want to make is about quality of life. And education is about quality of life. My daughter goes to school. I want her to get a good education so she can have a good quality of life. That's what it means for all children. And Millie Smith in her SLK guidebook and assessment uses, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he is a neurologist, and he defines clinically what quality of life is. And essentially it consists of three things: agency, which is the ability to control some people and some things; anticipation, which is something to look forward to with pleasure; and participation, which is somebody to do things with. And we have to consider for our kids how much ability to have control over these things they have. How much ability do they have to control what happens to them? And how much ability do they have to know that something they look forward to is going to happen, or something that they don't like is going to end, and that someone that they really enjoy is going to be there to do something with. So we got to start thinking about those things too. While we're massaging these guys up that learning continuum, this is an absolutely critical point. Calendars support those quality of life issues while providing that structured, meaningful opportunity to develop cognition, communication, motor, and self-regulatory skills. And it's tough sometimes to pull those, those learning objectives apart, but that is within the context of a calendar, but that is what calendars are going to do for our kids. So what's a calendar system? Typically, a calendar can take the form of a day planner. This kind of, you can probably tell this is an old slide too. I have my calendar on my iPad, on my iPhone. I have my, you got your Outlook calendar. So we can also have wall calendars for some of our kids in preschool, in elementary age classrooms. There's typically calendars posted at the top of the classroom so that the kids know the sequence of their day, so they know how to regulate their behavior and what things are going to happen. Another type of calendar is the Van Dyke calendar box, and that's what we're going to see some examples of today. So a calendar system is a device or in a calendar system, a timepiece is an important part of that, and we're going to talk about all of those things. And these calendar systems teach abstract concepts about time that's really needed in everything we do. I'm going to go to the next slide. So why are calendar systems important? Well, how would you regulate your behavior if you had no knowledge of the day's events, or if those events you couldn't understand, or if they were communicated to you very quickly and then not accessible to you anymore, and then you were rushed off to that activity? If you didn't know when, for instance, here's another big one. If you didn't know when you were going to have the ability to go to the bathroom, how would you? That's an important calendar system thing. You know, because of your schedule, when you're going to be able to go to the bathroom, when you're going to be able to get something to eat, all of those things. Our kids don't always know that. And then it also gives you the ability to look forward to some things. How many times have we thought about when spring break is coming, when warmer weather is coming, when the wedding is coming up, or when Friday is coming? That's delaying gratification. That helps us regulate our behavior. I can get through February if I know March is right around the corner and the snow is going to thaw. How do you feel when your schedule's interrupted? If you're right in the middle of something and you're totally focused, how would you feel if somebody came up to you and said, "Oh, you got it"? They wouldn't even say you got to end it necessarily. This is over, we're moving on to the next thing. How do you feel when you lose your calendar? That's happened to me before years ago. Your behavior, your stress level starts to escalate. And how would you feel if your day or schedule was dictated by someone else and you had no idea when things were ending or beginning and you had no control? When is this, a typical or an example too could be you guys know when this in-service is going to begin and when it's going to end. If you don't know when it's going to end or when it's going to begin, then you have no idea how to access it and how to regulate your behavior within the context of that learning environment. Knowledge of events drives our behavior and helps us focus our attention at the right time to receive information. Very important. Knowledge of events. How much knowledge of events do our kids have? Why are calendar systems important for behavior? It gives children a sense of security. Knowing what's going to happen and when reduces the stress a child can feel from not knowing when activities are going to happen or what those activities are going to be. And we can sit back and we can say, oh, he knows it happens in the same way every day. He knows what's going to happen to him, but it's not the same. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about static versus dynamic forms of communication. A schedule gives them the ability to anticipate, to look forward to fun things, and develop the ability to regulate emotions when non-preferred activities need to take place. They also start to realize, and this is a big one, and I know some of you guys will be able to relate to this, that wait doesn't mean no. So many of our kids, we gotta teach them how to wait, but if they don't have any concept of time, they think wait means no, and then the behavior starts to happen. It alerts the child to when unexpected changes in the routine will occur and give them the time needed to process the information and learn how to regulate their behaviors. Just because they're going to have a behavior problem when they know, or a behavior concern when they know a non-preferred event is going to take place does not mean we deny them access to that information. It means we figure out how to manage the event and the behavior so that this child, or we put some things in place to help him manage the event and the behavior so that this child can learn how to manage his emotions. We gotta teach them. They gotta have access. And I'll give you an example. I had a pretty tough example as a classroom teacher of a student who'd come unwound during non-preferred activities, but we had to put it up there, and eventually he learned how to regulate his emotions. Another reason why calendar systems are important for behavior is it gives the children, the opportunity to participate in decisions about the day's events, build a connection with the world outside, and supporting self-determination skills by giving them that much needed sense of control, direction, and understanding the rhythm of their life. Rhythm in our life is very important. The rhythm of our day, the rhythm of our seasons, the rhythm of our month, the rhythm of our week. Those things are important. If we want our kids to learn about those things, we got to give them access. We got to use a calendar. Calendars build a child's ability to wait, what we talked about a little bit earlier, for events that will happen, and increase the child's ability to tolerate or delay gratification. And it builds that trust. Trust that the event is going to happen, and promotes a secure, trusting relationship with people in their environment. Trust that things are going to happen, and trust that trust that events are going to end. Those things are important, especially when it comes to behavior for our kids. So I'm going to move on to the communication piece. And this is going to be a long one. And if any of the SLPs have input, Julie, I would love it if you watch that chat box and if you have any comments, because I'm not an SLP, but I see this as a critical part of communication. So communication is a system that allows us to build representational forms for things. It allows us, gives our students the ability to think in their own minds about things that are not present. Communicate with other people, to talk to us about did I say that already? Communicate with other people to talk about things that are not present. So they think in their own minds about things that are not present, and they can talk about things that are not present. And then they can think about things in past and future when they start to develop language. Calendars are a tool, a static tool we use to help develop communication. Words and symbols paired with activities create the meaning needed to develop coherence. And we're going to talk a little bit about coherence in one of our next slides. Some include things like words, objects, mimicked actions, pictures, that second bullet there, pictures, parts of objects, written words, and complex languages are higher level symbols. And sometimes they're used a little bit too often with our kids, or without being paired to another communicative form that our kids might have better access to. So why is coherence important? Coherence supports those organizing units of knowledge into concepts. Concepts are learning and understanding. So the human brain is neurologically predetermined to search for coherence. We're always trying to organize our world and make meaning out of where we're at and what we're doing. And we relate that back to other experiences that we've had to help create that meaning. Lack of coherence produces stress and results in avoidance. If you've ever been in a situation where you don't know what's going on, let's say I've had this experience within the last year. You're in an airport in a foreign country and you don't speak French and you're trying to get your rental car. My stress went up real high because there were things that we had to do on a certain timeline. So that lack of coherence, that lack of ability to figure out what needed to be done when and how you needed to do things presents in a stressful situation. And I want you to think about our kids and how often they might be avoiding situations or stressed out about situations because they don't have coherence. They don't understand what's going on. If you remember might have been one of our very first presentations when I talked about what the lack of visual information does for our kids, lack of visual, auditory, tactile, any kind of distance information does for our kids, it produces this lack of coherence. They have a hard time weaving these clusters of people and things, images, events into a meaningful whole. So we got to help. Calendars are going to help us support that coherence that they need. So this is, when we talk about communication, there are two forms that I'm going to talk about for today's discussion: static and dynamic. Static are symbols or drawings, print, braille, objects, tactile symbols. They stay there. There's something you can touch and refer back to. You can come in contact and you can refer back to. Dynamic symbols, signing, speaking, finger spelling, whatever, those things, as soon as you say them, they're done, they're gone. You can't refer back to them. That's important for us to remember about for our kids, because sometimes there might be some kind of a language, let's say an activity that they're trying to think of in their mind that they want to request, but if they're not skilled at dynamic communication, that's a challenge for them to bring up, to recall. Whereas if we have a static system in place for them, we can use that system to help support that communication, that want or that need that they're trying to express. And I'm not saying that we're doing one or the other, but I'm saying static can help to support that dynamic communication system. I hope I said that right. Let me make sure this is going in the right direction. Okay, so oh, there we go. Sorry, guys. So calendars help to make sense of random experiences. They provide the breadth of experience required for good concept and scheme development. So that these, again, we gotta weave this cluster of meaningless activities and experiences into a whole for them so that they start to understand what's going on. It expands their concepts of time meaningfully into past and present, the now and future. It waits. Tomorrow, yesterday, etc. They maximize communication development by using a easily relatable, highly motivational topics, their schedule, their day, that's something they're easy, what their day consists of, that's something they can relate to very easily, and it's something they're very motivated to attend to. Calendars use those two things to build an understanding for the function of expressive communication using a static form they can easily refer back to out of context. So that's the communication piece. The movement piece, this is important too. Calendars promote movement by establishing purpose. We got kids who get in walkers and their goal is they're going to walk 100 feet. But if there's no purpose for that movement, and if the child doesn't understand what the purpose for that movement is, they might just hang out in their walker in the hallway or go over and stand by the light because they don't know there's something they're going to do next. They don't understand those concepts of time. It helps create urgency. Understanding that concept of time gives the child a sense that there's something to do next, something to do in the future. So next, these levels of calendars are identified in Robbie Blaha's book. I got it right here in front of me. The Calendars book for students with multiple impairments, including deaf blindness. There's a reference to that in this handout as well, in the PowerPoint as well. So for the purposes of this discussion, those three levels are an anticipation level calendar, a partial day and or daily calendar, and then a weekly, multi-weekly, or monthly calendar. And so here, before we move into how to start a calendar, what I wanted to do was show you guys a few examples of calendars on those various levels. Oh, and please keep in mind, these calendars are highly individualized, and they should be individualized. I don't know that I've ever seen two calendars that look exactly the same, because our kids have different needs. Our kids have different needs in terms of their visual access, in terms of their cognitive and communication needs, and in terms of their in terms of their behavior or their self-regulatory needs. So this is an anticipation level calendar. On this left-hand side is the two forms of the calendar. And so basically what they are is the white one on that left side there, that is the now box. And then the yellow one on the right is the finished box. So what we teach our kids at this level is now and finished. Now and finished. Okay, and they need to be two distinctly different baskets, because now and finished are two distinctly different concepts. And depending on what the visual needs are and the tactile needs are of this student, that's how you're going to establish what this now and finished basket are going to look like. We don't want to do two plastic baskets that look exactly the same, because those are, we're teaching them we're trying to teach them two different words with exactly the same tactile experience. Hope that makes sense. So in the picture on the right-hand side, this student's name, and I'm going to show you some ways these things are set up, but what I like about the setup that this student has was they identified real closely to where this student's calendar is, what he likes and what he doesn't like. And that's important, because we got to know what alienates this kid from instruction and what motivates him to attend. So if we got kids, they don't like their hands being touched, they don't like being, so we got some kids who don't like deep touch, some kids who don't like gentle touch. We got to know about those things before we get out of the gate with some of this stuff. And I think we talked about that in our routines presentation as well. Motivation is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical for our kids, for all of us. This is one way, and you can, there's the calendar up there, kind of at the top of your screen with that. There's a smaller picture within it. But this is an object symbol list and storage system. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I want you guys to know this doesn't have to be the most beautiful looking thing in the world, We're very visual people. Sometimes we think it needs to look good. It doesn't have to look good. It has to be tactily discerning to the student, okay? or visually different to the student, those objects. And the objects they chose for each of those activities are related to the activity itself. We're not just picking something that looks like it might be related to the activity. We got to pick something that this child relates to that activity. So for this student, for instance, when he does, I'm going to come down to that picture, when he does the foot bath activity, he gets a picture, and that picture represents the activity of the foot bath. He's touching that during the activity. Grooming, he's using his toothbrush. Music, he's using a tambourine in there. Okay, so each of those objects represent something that he comes in contact with during the activity. And here, the reason I like this is I like it when teachers put up the activity, the instructions, the location, and the symbol. And I think I have a slide in later in the presentation that uses some real highly scripted language. And for some of our kids, they need that, okay? So the activity for Kenneth is the rocking chair. Here are the instructions, and this is nice. It was nice for me as a special ed teacher because my parents could see it. This list of posted symbols, locations, instruction, and activity obviously isn't for the student. This for me was more for my parents, so they could see, this is what you're going to say, here's the object, this is what you're going to do, okay? And our kids need that structure. And the location is one of those things that's important too for these kids on that anticipation level, because that location is part of what tells them what's going to happen here. It's one of those ways that we weave those clusters of events and things and places into this meaningful whole. So when Kenneth is doing his activity on the spin board, he knows he's using it's going to happen on the Turkish mat. It always happens on the Turkish mat. So then he has this frame of reference. This is what's going to happen. And then he can start to regulate his behavior or make choices about his behavior based upon what he knows is going to happen. Here's another anticipation level calendar. I really like this one because they're two definitely distinctly different textures and colors. So for our kids with visual impairments, those different colors help to support that, that visual piece. Perhaps this could be a CVI kid. That visual piece of, oh, I know my now basket is white and my finished basket is orange. And that's a little bit of a tin basket there. So when she puts the objects in there, it makes a bit of a sound. And that's always kind of nice too, to know, bing, it's finished. This was an anticipation level calendar for a middle school age student. And the thing with middle school age students, and that we're going to talk about a little bit later, is the logistics are always something that's going to trip you up a little bit. So for this young man, they couldn't put an anticipation level calendar in just one room like you saw in that in those last slides. So what they did was they created a basket, and then here on the top where the Velcro is, that indicated that this is now. And then when he was done, he put it in the finished basket here, this plastic one. The only thing I would say about the finished basket itself is I'd really like to have a different texture on there, because plastic feels a lot like plastic, feels a lot like plastic. So that would be the modification that I would probably want to make to this finished container. Feels like, or you can use some of that red duct tape. They got all that colored tape coming out now. So the next level of calendar is going to be a partial day calendar. When our kids start to recognize these chunks of time or these activities, like I think it's 3 or 4 or 5 activities at that anticipation level calendar, then we're going to bump them up into a partial day calendar. So now they're starting to think about sequence. This, then this, then this. And then we start talking about language like it waits and later. And we're going to our SLPs can be one of our best friends because they're going to help us choose that language when we move up to these various levels. So the blue calendar is, these are the chunks of time. These are the things that are going to happen. That's how we're defining activities within the sequence of the day, within these chunks of time here. The objects within them symbolize the activity. Then on the right-hand side here of that picture, you'll see the finished basket within there. And on the bottom here, that milk crate, that's just a way that they use to store the symbols. Nothing special about it. I really like it when it doesn't look too fancy, because then I feel like you guys can feel a little bit more like this is very doable. I need to look at one thing before I move ahead here. Okay. So moving forward, as you can see with this little girl, she was moving from object symbols to tactile symbols. So she was using some object symbols, and she was also using some tactile symbols within various events. You can do that. Their ability to learn, to move up that level of abstraction, going from a full object symbol down to a partial object symbol and then a tactile symbol, you better be talking to your TVI about that and your SLP about that. And then you guys got to watch your student and see, is he or she, what do you think when they're moving from these symbols, is he or she ready for that? And probably the events that he either has the most, either really likes the most or really likes the least are the symbols that he's going to be learning first and moving into those different levels of abstraction with, because there's so much emotion attached to it. He cares so much, you know, makes the same for us. But I like this being posted because it helps the people, the adults that are working in that room, to know this is exactly what you say, these are the symbols you're going to use, and this is what it means. Now we're moving up to a daily calendar. And as you can see, this young man, well, in the milk crate behind it, he's still at a partial object, I'd say partial object level. He's not necessarily at a tactile symbol, those smaller symbol systems yet, but he's ready in terms of organizing his day. It's just that he wasn't ready in terms of, for the symbols, in terms of that reducing the level, or in terms of increasing that level of abstraction. So he's not ready to go from partial objects into a tactile symbol just yet. Their team made that decision. And as you can see with this guy too, again, they're posting, I'm going to go back one more time. I really like how this is set up here for the adults that are working with this guy. And there's objectives up there too. Oops, sorry. So it lists the activity, the object, and this young man, well, this guy was, I think he was maybe 19 or 20. And then they talk about the sign, and then they indicate the sign and the verbalization that goes with it. So it's nice. We need that consistency with language and touch. Language without touch for a child who's visually impaired, and even I would say for a lot of kids, language without touch doesn't give them as good of an indication of meaning. You gotta have those two things together. It helps to support that meaning piece. When I can touch it and it's paired with that language, then it supports my ability to learn about that thing. If you're just talking about it and I'm not touching it, I'm not really sure what you're talking about, you know? So we gotta be sure we're getting them tactile as well as auditory access. Here is this was actually a little preschooler, and her, on the very top, this little girl is actually completely blind. On the very top is her daily schedule. And then what they did was, when she had centers time, she was just sitting in centers and she wasn't doing much of anything. So then what they did was they built her a mini calendar for centers that tells her which centers are available: writing, art, cooking, library, and then the sequence that she's going to go through those things. So again, going back to that movement piece, it helps promote active movement and exploration of her environment. And this was her finished box over here on the right. I don't know if you can see it very well either, but because this little girl was going to be a Braille reader, maybe you can see it on the bottom of that 14 right there. They brailled a lot of her tactile symbols because she should start just like our sighted kids. She should start to develop this connection of these symbols, those even more abstract symbols, into language or form. I hope that kind of makes sense. And that's a call you're going to make with your TDIs. We don't just Braille anything. We got to talk to the TDI and find out, is this kid going to be a large print kid? Is he going to be Braille? What's going on here? How's he going to access literacy? Because just like we talked about in our session on experience books and boxes, we got to give them access so that they start to understand and internalize what those things mean. And it builds in motivation for learning. Here's another weekly calendar. Again, this ain't rocket science, folks. You know, the calendar itself and those chunks of times are just a carpet square with a piece of string differentiating those chunks of time. And this guy, as you can probably see, is probably low vision, might have CVI. Might have, well, maybe. Okay. Again, your TVI, and that's why these calendars are very individualized. You got to talk to your TVI about what they have visual and or tactile access to, and then I'm going to my SLP and I'm asking her about language. Here's another, this is a weekly calendar. Certain big events that happen during the week, some kids are very interested in knowing and are ready to know, and we need to, we need to find a form to communicate those in. And here's a monthly calendar, and I got to tell you, I saw the young man use this, and there's a video, one of those videos on the TSBVI site that I have in your Word document handout. The gentleman's name using it is Jarvis. It's Matt and Jarvis, and Jarvis does not have, I would say, a lot of expressive communication, but he's very invested in knowing when things are going to happen to him, especially when he's going to go home and see his mom. He was a residential student, and he was very invested in knowing when he was going to go see his mom. So he's going through his calendar with Matt, this activity, and he got very emotional, very happy when he knew it was going to be time to go see his mom. This is another way to do a monthly calendar, and it's a way, when I saw this young man doing it, to me, it really communicated something to me, or resonated to me, because one of the things I do almost every day is write down. I have my calendar, and then I have a list of things that I do and prioritize every day, and it's almost kind of therapeutic for me. And so this was, I think they might have even published some research about this on TSBVI. This was another way he is involved in his day and his month, and it gives him control and helps him to think through his day and his month and how he's going to be involved and what things he has to look forward to and what things are potentially in the past. Those concepts of time in more abstract forms. One thing that I'm going to say about this slide before we move on to the next one that I think is real important is sometimes we'll get people who say, well, he's fine now, he doesn't need a calendar anymore, or he knows his day, he doesn't need his calendar anymore. And what I'm going to tell everybody out there is, the day our kids don't need a calendar is the day none of us need a calendar. It changes in complexity, it changes in type, it changes in what needs it's meeting for the student, but we do not ever not need a calendar. If that were the case, we wouldn't have, 30-day, I can't tell you how many calendars I got almost hanging up, calendar for my daughter, calendar of activities for my dad, all those things. Calendars do not go away. I can't stress that enough. So some of my favorite resources in terms of calendars are, there's an article called Let Me Check My Calendar by Robbie Blayhop. That's a longer article, and even though it's a bit older. I think it was in maybe 97 or so. I really like it because it breaks down some of those components that I was talking to you about in terms of anticipation level calendar, daily calendar, and how to troubleshoot or get those things moving in more detail than what I feel like I could do in an hour-long session. The next one is Beginning to Use an Object Calendar by Stacy Shaver. Those two articles are nice articles. I would also say to you, again, I referred you guys to that I gave you a Word document as part of your handouts, has the Paths to Literacy site on it. That is one of my new favorites. And there's some information in the Paths to Literacy site about calendars. Also, the TSBVI website, Chris Montgomery, has done a real nice job of creating kind of like this 101 site for, actually, I think he designed it for kids who are deafblind, but I think it has really wide-reaching applications for our kids who are visually and multiply impaired, are real are really challenged learners. Let's see, oh, and then I think there was another one, NCDB, which is the National Center on Deaf Blindness. Yeah, NCDB. There's a link on there, and what I did was search calendars, and they have, then I sent you that link there, and they have some video footage. They got some nice video footage, some webinars on calendars, some articles, so that's a nice place to stop for you guys to look as well. My other favorite, absolute favorite, it's like my Bible. I've worn the first 3 pages off of it. Book is The Calendars for Students with Multiple Impairments and Deaf Blindness. If any of you have ever taken a class from me, the Assessment and Intervention class, that's a staple of that class. Whenever I do workshops and lectures, this is something I come back to pretty frequently. And what I think that it's available, I know it's available from TSBVI, Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I know it costs about $35, and it's a very simple, easy read. At the end of the book, there's a troubleshooting guide, so if something happens and you feel like this is not going well, I'm not sure what's happening here, this isn't working, I encourage teams to go through that troubleshooting guide. There's also some sections within there about which level of calendar your student is ready for, knowing which level, like this little mini assessment. And then you can read in those various sections about how you can support implementation of calendars on those various levels. Okay, so today, real briefly, we're going to talk about some steps for implementation. And the big thing that I would encourage you and that I would say to y'all is don't overthink this, you know, and get in there, roll your sleeves up and do it. You're gonna feel a little challenged at first, but once you get it up and running, it'll make more sense. You just gotta bite the bullet and take the plunge. So the first thing that I would recommend you do is you have to make sure you know what the appropriate goals and objectives for the child's communication program is. Where is he or she at in terms of communication? And some of my favorite tools are the Communication Matrix by Charity Rowland, the Infused Skills Assessment by Linda Haygood. Your TDIs, your Teachers of the Visually Impaired, can get y'all a copy of that. The Sensory Learning Kit by Millie Smith. And then also, what I really like that Julie has recently come out with is that AAC planning tool. You know, those first 3 things are 3 of my favorites. There's more than one way to skin a cat, folks. And if you look at Julie's AAC planning tool and the folks from Grant Wood, what they developed, I think you can get a pretty good sense of what the child's goals and objectives are based on assessment. We cannot just pull these goals out of nowhere anymore. So once you've determined where they're at in terms of their communication level, then you got to think about modifications the student needs to access instruction or access that calendar system. So one of the places you're going to go to is if this child has a visual impairment, you're going to look at the learning media assessment and functional vision assessment, and that's developed by the teacher of the visually impaired. If within there you don't have a clear idea of how is this child going to access that calendar, is he going to be, are we going to use whole object, partial object, tactile symbols, braille, what are we going to use? Then you need to have some discussions with your TVI. And I'm not going to say they always have the answers either. This is a team thing, you guys, and sometimes, although we all wish we all had the answers that we need within our various fields, this is a complicated group of kids. So if you're still struggling after you've spoken with your TVI and looked at the FDA and LMA, and you guys are still struggling, then we can always have a conversation. Give me a call or shoot me an email. The other things that you need to consider in terms of modifications, again, these are things we talked about in our other presentations. Pacing. Sometimes we move too quickly. When I see, I can open my eyes and in a blink, I have access to everything that's in this room. When a child is touching and needs to explore the properties of objects to understand what they are and understand what they need more time. And sometimes you need to make sure you're using, at that time, instructional language and not chatter. And I got some slides about that later on in the presentation. So pacing, access, tactile access, auditory, how is this child accessing his or her calendar? How are you using that touch experience paired with the language to support their understanding of what this thing is? Then what you're going to do is you're going to develop an outline of the student's typical daily schedule. And those activities, and again, one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation is, I'm checking my time here, Julie, is the reason why we didn't do the calendars piece until later on in this presentation is because presentation series is because now your child should have some meaningful activities. They should have some probably active learning experiences. They should have some literacy experiences. They should have some routines that are very meaningful. Okay, that they have access to, that they understand there's a beginning and an end to this, and that they understand how they're involved in it. If they're not involved in an activity, chances are they're not going to know when it begins and when it ends. So we got to get them more involved. Okay, so I think that's enough about that. So then the next thing you're going to do, now you outline your student's day, then you got to think about the appropriate time frame and time pieces. Time frame, remember, is, are we going to do an anticipation level calendar? Are we going to do a daily calendar or those mini calendars? Like you might be doing some smaller chunks of time. You might only be doing 2 or 3 chunks of time. That might be where your student is. And then are you moving into a weekly, multi-weekly, or monthly calendar? So that's your time frame. That's the form of time, those little boxes that you saw. And then the time pieces are what those activities are represented by, the objects to represent the activities. So that should be, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, that should be something the child comes in contact with during the activity. Don't use miniatures. Don't use a miniature bus at the end of the day to represent that this child's going home. Because they don't, when you use a miniature of a bus, visually, it's very representative of what a bus is. But tactily, if you're going to use a miniature, that kid has got to know what that whole bus looks like, what all those wheels look like, lights, that it's yellow, all those things. Well, maybe not the yellow piece if they're visually impaired. But anyway, when you got to put that all together, it's or chances are they're not going to have access to that whole bus. So when you use a miniature, it's confusing. You got to pick the most salient feature, the thing that that kid is in contact with on the bus. A lot of people use seatbelts. Okay. So now you've picked out you scripted out your event day, you picked out your time piece, you've picked out your, what's the other language I use for that? Your timepiece, and you've picked out your symbols, and then what you're going to do is you're going to script out some language. And how highly scripted this language is going to be is going to depend upon your child's needs. And again, we're talking to the SLP, and we're going to be talking to the TDI. Let's see, I think that's in this slide. Use your SLP, the communication assessment information, and what concepts about time you have prioritized. So, very frequently for our kids that are living in the now, that everything is right now and they don't understand past and future, very frequently we might need to target future or next or wait as a concept that we're going to teach. And wait might be taught in a way that first they're waiting for brief seconds, and then eventually we move that time up. We have taught and we're teaching wait, and that's real important. Now, and I think this might be later too, but I'm going to just mention it for the sake of mentioning it again. Remember, the calendar is an important part of developing communication. It's not just another tool we use to dictate to our kids, oh, you're going to do this, then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that. It's a tool. We're going to help them to learn about those concepts of time and about emotions. So when we talk about kids have fits and behaviors or all of that stuff, they have to recognize and label some of their emotions. A good way to recognize and label those emotions is, in a preferred activity, we're going to use the word like. In a non-preferred activity, we're going to use the word don't like. So then when they start to get in a crunch behaviorally, we can pull some of that language up, like, I don't like, past, finished, whatever, to help them regulate their emotions. They got to be able to label some of their emotions before they start to regulate their behaviors. Sorry, Claire, you're going to have to get out of here if you keep doing that. I got to. Okay, hope that made sense. Okay, so then the next thing that you're going to do is, you got your time pieces, you got your calendar, your calendar system in place, then you've got some language that you're going to use. Now you're going to do a trial run. And I'm telling you, you're going to change the language that you use. You're probably going to change your symbol system too, because sometimes when you get it up and running, then life happens and you realize the logistics that this calendar might necessitate. So sometimes, portability can be an issue, where to put it so that this child has access to it, and then problems with traveling sometimes. So those are things logistically that we have to think about. And then always, this is something that we just don't spend enough time doing, you guys, and I hope that I've covered this in previous sessions as well, is you've got to spend a little bit of time reflecting and evaluating your calendar. And I would be doing that with your team too. This is working, this is not working. Do the calendar with your SLP and your TDI watching, or your OT watching, and say, what do you think? Tell me, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? Watch other people do it. Watch your peers do it. Some people have the magic touch and just instinctively know what to do. But you want to, well, I'm going to wait and we'll talk about this. So most common errors, oh, this is very timely. Most common errors, limiting the student's communication to the calendar. Action should be happening through activity itself. Doing calendar activities without communication. So once again, this goes back to that point that I made earlier in terms of using the calendar as a tool to dictate to the child. This is what you're going to do. Boom, 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 boom. What that does is change that calendar to stimulus response level. I'm telling you to do this. We got to remember that quality of life issue. Anticipation, participation, and then somebody to do things with. This calendar is a tool that's going to allow them to do those things, to have more control over their lives, to anticipate things that they really enjoy, and to build communication, just like in all of those slides we talked about earlier. We got to give them time. The calendar is an activity in and of itself, and it can take some time, and that's okay. So, that speaks to that third point of rushing through the calendar activity and not giving the student time to think. Remember, we talked in that communication slide, they got to internalize it. And sometimes that means we got to be quiet and we got to give them time to touch and think through this whole thing.
Cindy,
critical factors to
about 2 minutes left, just to let you know.
Okay, Okay, I'm bringing Julie.
I know.
So critical factors to consider are building that relationship. If I don't like you, I really don't want to do the calendar with you. Okay, remember how we talked about that in other sessions? If you don't have a good relationship with that child, this calendar is not going to work. You got to build that relationship, that trust relationship. Work together as a team. That's another important, very important piece of this whole thing. You've got to pull the people that have some expertise and insight into what's going on with this student. We don't have the expectation that everybody knows everything, but working together can really help this move our kids forward. So critical factor to consider, you have to document this and think and articulate what that looks like. Collect some data about language. I already talked a little bit earlier, never stop using a calendar system for a child. It only evolves and becomes more sophisticated. And I think with that, Julie, I'm going to close. There's a couple of slides here on chatter and instructional language. And if you, when you're considering how to use your symbols for your kids, I think that's easy enough for y'all to refer to. The only thing I'll say is, just some closing thoughts are a word about mistakes. Don't sweat the small stuff. You got to keep doing something is better than doing nothing. And what I would recommend too is start with one student and develop their calendar. Then you can more easily generalize the skill to other students. So I wish you all good luck, and hope that I did justice to the topic in an hour.